Hi friends, thank you so much for joining me for cake decorating today. One of the projects that we had available for purchase on our website this week is our Hockey Mascot Cake Kit. And this video is going to show you how to put all of those components together to create that project. Before we get started, we want to make sure that our hands are nice and clean. Whenever you're making food that someone else will be eating, your number one job is to make sure that you don't put your germs on it. So we're going to wash our hands and try very hard to keep our fingers out of our mouths while we're working. I know that can be hard when we're working with icing, but we're going to give it a try. All right, you also need to gather some other things besides what was in your kit. You're going to need a pair of scissors. You're going to need something to spread your icing. Now I'll be using an offset spatula because that's what we have here at the studio. If you don't have an offset spatula at home, no need to worry. You can use a butter knife or even the back of a spoon to spread your icing. Another thing that I like to have nearby is a wet tea towel or some paper towels so that I can keep my hands nice and clean if I get icing on them, or wipe up any spills of icing as I go. All right, now I can't speak to the record or the successes of any of the professional sports team in our area, but one thing I can say for sure is that we have some of the best mascots. So we're gonna immortalize one of those mascots in cake with this project. So we're gonna start by unwrapping our cake and placing it on our cake board. We want to make sure that that crusty flat part is what's on the top. And we're going to put that in the center of our cake board. Now, I'm using a cake turntable to decorate my cake. It is not necessary to use a turntable. If you don't have one at home, don't worry about it. You can ice your cake right on the table. You can also take the plate and the ring out of your microwave and use that as a turntable as well. All right, so we're going to start by giving our cake a base coating of orange icing. So you have your container of orange icing. You're going to open up the top, and we're going to start to ice our cake. Now, typically I ice the sides of my cake first, and then I do the top. See, I even forget what I do sometimes. We're going to do the sides of the cake first because sometimes it can be a little bit hard to control the icing once you push it over the edge of the cake. So doing the sides of our cake first gives us a little more control over our decorating. Now, when I'm using an offset spatula, I always use the bottom part of the spatula here to spread the icing. So that's where I want to put my icing in order to apply it to my cake. And same thing if you're using a butter knife or a spoon, you'll use the back of that. So I'm going to get a nice big scoop of icing, and I'm going to start to apply it to the cake. Now here at Sugar Plum Studio, we employ a method that we call the scoop and the smoosh when we put icing on a cake. We take a nice big scoop and then we smoosh it onto the side. Now if you look, I'm not worried about smoothing it out or making it nice and pretty because there are two stages to decorating a cake. The first stage is getting the icing on. The second stage is making it smooth and pretty, and we're not worried about smooth and pretty right now. In fact, we're mostly not going to see this layer of icing on the cake. We will on the sides, but not so much on the top. This is just a base coating of icing. So we want to cover the whole sides of our cake, making sure that we bring that icing from the top edge of the cake where the top and the sides meet all the way down to the cake board. So you can't see up underneath my cake. You want to make sure that that icing goes all the way down to the cake board. You shouldn't be able to peek up underneath your cake. On a well-iced cake, you shouldn't know what flavor it is before you cut it. Now, I can tell you that it takes a long time and a lot of practice to get really good at decorating a cake to where you don't have any crumbs in your icing. And especially if you chose a chocolate cake for your project, you might see some crumbs in your icing. Crumbs sometimes happen. So I can tell you that cakes that have crumb in their icing are just as beautiful and just as delicious as cakes that don't have crumb in their icing. And especially for those of you who have chocolate cake, you're in luck because our team colors happen to be orange and white and black. So those black crumbs from your cake are just going to add to your overall decoration of the cake. See, there's always a silver lining. All right, so once I have the icing on the side of my cake, I'm just going to smooth that out as best as I can. And then I'm going to move to putting the icing on the top. So I should be able to scrape up the rest of that icing and put that on the top of the cake, and then I'm going to use my spatula to spread that all over the top, making sure that that icing goes all the way to the edges so that it meets the icing that I put on the side and that there's no bits of cake peeking through. All right, so this is my goal with icing. Now you can see it's not super smooth and pretty. I'm gonna do that next. Right now I'm just making sure that my whole cake is covered and there aren't any bits of cake peeking through. So once I have it all covered, then I can start smoothing. So I'm gonna use that back of my spatula. I'm gonna run my spatula around the sides of my cake. Right, and you'll take a little bit of icing off in the smoothing process. You want a very, very light pressure against the side of your cake. You shouldn't be taking big, huge bits of icing off. If you are, that means you're pressing a little too hard. Just ease up on your pressure. All right, so I smoothed out the sides of my cake, and then I'm going to smooth the top of my cake just by running my spatula very gently over that edge and in towards the center. Now, I'm very fast at this because I have decorated many, many cakes in my life, so it will probably take you a bit longer to do it. If you need to stop the video, you can certainly do that and catch up. There's no rush. Everyone will work at their own pace. So don't think that you have to keep up with me. All right, so I have my cake nice and nice. So the last thing I'm gonna do before I move over to my piping bags is clean up my cake board a little bit. If you take a look at my board, you see all that like smeared icing all over. We wanna make sure we clean that up because presentation is very, very important in cake decorating. Even if your cake is not the most beautifully iced cake, if you present it on a nice, clean cake board, that shows me that you cared and you took the time and you wanted to make it look nice. Even if you have a beautifully iced cake and you present it on a messy, messy cake board, well, that's all people are gonna notice is your messy cake board. They're not gonna notice your beautifully iced cake. So we wanna make sure that our cake is, our cake board is nice and clean. All right, so I have all my icing scraped off. If you have any icing left in that container, you can go ahead and put that lid on. You can store this in your refrigerator. It's really good on graham crackers or vanilla wafers, something like that. So you can store that in your refrigerator. All right, so next I'm going to start with my icing bags. So I want to make sure that my spatula, my knife, or my spoon, whatever you're using to spread your icing, is nice and clean. I want to clean all of that orange icing off because we're going to be switching to black icing, so we want to make sure that it's nice and clean. All right, so I'm going to take that bag of black icing and I'm going to cut the tip off the bag. Now I want to cut a relatively small hole off the top of that bag. See, just a little hole like that. This was my cast off cut piece here. You should always cut smaller than you think you need, and you can give it a practice squeeze and see how it comes out, because you can always cut your bag bigger. But if you cut the hole too big to start out with, you can't make it smaller. So it's always better to cut it smaller and cut it bigger if you need to. All right, so with my black bag, I'm gonna make the outline of our friend's mouth here. So I'm gonna start about a little more than halfway. I have the halfway point of my cake and I'm gonna go just below that. And I'm gonna draw a line. And it doesn't have to be perfect because we're gonna fill it in with icing anyway. And then I'm gonna draw kind of a half circle meeting the line. So I have the outline of the mouth. And then I'm going to take my bag and I'm going to draw lines back and forth, filling in that space. So you'll see what I mean here. So I'm just going to keep squeezing and I'm going to fill in that space here until you can't see any more orange underneath. Now you can leave that as is if you filled it all in and you can't see any orange underneath it, or if you'd like to smooth it out so you can't see those piping lines, you can certainly do that with your spoon or your spatula or your butter knife. You just have to be very, very gentle to make sure that you don't smush that black icing outside of that line that we piped. We want to make sure that it stays where it's supposed to be, like that. All right, so that's going to be our friend's mouth. Then we're gonna pipe the same type of shape at the top of the cake, but all the way at the top, and that's gonna be our friend's helmet. So I want it to be about the same size as that, maybe a little bit smaller, the very, very top of the cake. So I'm gonna start again by drawing that line, and then I'm gonna follow that curved edge of my cake and make my outline like that. And then I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna fill that in with the black icing. And smooth that. You don't have to smooth it. You can leave it just piped. It's entirely up to you. This is your art. You get to decide what it looks like. All right, I am happy with that. All right, so now that I have my mouth and my helmet piece piped, actually I'm gonna straighten out my helmet just a bit. It looks a little crooked to me. Sometimes I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I mean, I don't think that that's a bad thing, but you wanna make sure that you don't forget to have fun while you're decorating the cake. And sometimes those of us who, you know, always like things to be perfect and nice and neat, sometimes we have a hard time when things don't turn out perfectly, and I try really hard not to be that way, but I have to remind myself that it's just cake and we're doing this as a fun project, so it certainly does not have to be perfect. All right, so now I have it the way that I want it. Now what I'm gonna do is take my piping bag and I'm gonna start to make the fur on my friend here. Now this piping bag is fitted with a star tip. And what we're gonna do is hold the bag up at the top like this, where I have that rubber band. And we wanna make sure we hold it at the top. When we hold it down here, not a lot of icing will come out of the bag. By squeezing the bag up here, it pushes the icing out through the bag, and that's the easiest way to do it. All right, so the tip that's on this bag is called a star tip. And it's called a star tip because when you squeeze it one time, it makes a star shape. All right, so we're gonna be making kind of lines of stars. So see how I squeezed it as I brought it down on my finger? That's what we're gonna be doing on our friend here to make that kind of long, shaggy fur. And if you need to, you can do a few practice pipes on a paper towel or right on your table, because you can always wipe that off. The point here is to make sure you're not trying to get it perfect, because when you think about our friend, I don't think he spends a lot of time brushing his hair, right? His hair is a little bit crazy. So it's okay if your pipes are not even or a little bit messy. It will just lend to the overall decor of your cake. So don't worry about making it perfect, all right? So I like to start like at that bottom portion of my cake where the mouth is. So that's where I'm gonna start. And I'm just gonna do rows of those shaggy lines. I'm just squeezing and pulling as I go. Just squeeze and pull and squeeze and pull and squeeze and pull. And then once I do one line, I'm gonna do another line and just fill that whole space in with that shaggy fur. See how I did that? Very good. All right, now before I do the upper portion of his face, I'm gonna get his eyes set so that I'm putting them exactly where I want them. All right, so we have a cup of all of the eye pieces here, if you would. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is place the white parts. So I'm gonna put the white parts of his eyes right down on the surface of my cake like that. And then I'm gonna use that black piping bag and pipe in the center of each white spot, a tiny little black dot, just enough so that my orange pieces, my little orange circles here, will stick. You don't want to use too much black icing, because if you pipe a big, huge dot of black icing, then it will squish out underneath the orange piece. All right, and then inside each orange piece, I'm gonna pipe another dot. Now this one can be a little bit bigger because this is gonna be the pupil of our friend's eyes. So that can be a little bit bigger. And then I'm gonna take those 2 tiny white dots that were in your little cup, and I'm gonna place them on top but to the side of those little black pieces. And the reason that we do that is whenever we make kind of a character out of cake, we always want them to look a little animated, and those little dots will serve as like, you know, glints of light shining off of his eyes, and it just helps make characters look a little more alive. All right, so we have our eyes in there, and the last fondant piece we're gonna place is our tongue. So we're gonna line up this flat line with the long flat edge of that black mouth that we piped, like that. All right, now that we have those placed on our cake, we can continue to pipe our fur. All right, so what I'm gonna do is pipe a line of those, you know, fuzzy squeezes right along his mouth. Like that. And then I'm going to continue to pipe those, filling in all of that space. Now, remember what I said, you don't have to worry too much about making them nice and neat or even uniform, because I don't think this guy is spending a lot of time brushing his hair. So, you know, if it's a little bit crazy, I think it's just going to make it look all the more realistic. I just want to fill in all of those spaces around his face and his eyes and his head. Now, I have been piping icing on cakes for a very long time, so again, I'm pretty quick at it. So you might need a little bit more time to do this, and that is perfectly fine if you do. If you need to turn off this video until you have everything piped and get caught up, that's perfectly fine. You can do that. It's going to stay right there on our YouTube channel, and it's not going anywhere. So you have as much time as you need to do this cake. All right, so as you can see, I did not use all of the icing in my bag. So if you wanted to go ahead and continue those fuzzy pipes all the way around the side of your cake, you probably have enough icing to cover the whole thing. But I would say get the top, the face done first, and then if you have extra icing, because some people squeeze a little harder than others, so your icing might be very, very thick and you might not have enough to go all around your cake. So, you know, just make sure you do the top of the cake first before you try to cover the sides. All right, so there's my piped face. Now the last thing I'm going to do is give my guy some eyebrows, or some, like, outline the rim of his eyes. So I'm going to use that black piping bag again. I'm going to make sure that I clean the top of it off, because sometimes icing, when you have these small holes, the icing like gathers on the top, and then you don't get a nice neat line when you pipe. So you want to make sure that it's nice and clean before you try to do this. So I'm going to use that bag, and with a steady squeeze, I'm going to outline the top half of each of my eyes. All right, so I'm going to do 1 and 2. All right, and there we have it. There's our finished hockey mascot cake. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this project, you can take a look at our calendar and see some of the other fun projects that we have coming up for to-go kits that you can make at home, or workshops that you can do in studio. So take care, keep washing those hands, and we'll see you soon. Bye.